Everyone, welcome. To kick things off this morning, we have our first panel, which is the SEC's role in cyber and emerging technology, including AI, enforcement and disclosures. It's everyone's favorite topic, and we're excited to have some people who actually know what to say about it. Moderating our panel is Margaret Nelson, partner at Foley and Lardner in Chicago. She previously worked at the SEC Chicago Regional Office for nine years. We have Arsen Ablaev, who's a senior attorney in the SEC Chicago Regional Office, where he's been for 9 years himself, and he was senior advisor to the chief of the SEC's Cyber and Emerging Technologies Unit. We have Shoba Pillay, who's a partner at Jenner & Block here in Chicago also, and previously served as an AUSA in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois. We have David Reece, my former colleague from the SEC's Fort Worth Regional Office, where he was senior trial counsel and an assistant regional director, and he's now senior legal counsel at AT&T. And last but not least, we have Luke Tenery, who's a partner in StoneTurn's Chicago office, and where he is a certified chief information security officer and helps organizations with cybersecurity, data privacy, and data protection risks.
Okay, good morning, everyone. As Rebecca said, I'm Margaret Nelson. I'll be moderating this fine panel. We expect to have a great discussion, and we're happy to be the first panel of the third annual Securities Enforcement Forum Central. And we're happy to have you all here, so thanks very much. We're going to kick the forum off, discussing AI in the SEC and other regulatory spaces. A quick disclaimer here, obviously it's a hot topic, and it is quickly evolving. So we are doing our best to talk about where it's headed, but to be honest, we're not exactly sure. So with that kind of background, let's start with our first question, which is to Arsen, our SEC representative. Can you kick things off by generally describing the SEC's overall priorities in the AI emerging technology space?
Yes. Okay, so the mics are working, I can tell. Good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to say thank you to Securities Docket for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here today, and to my co-panelists for including me on this panel. Even though I'm very excited to be here, I have to say that the views that I present here are presented in my official capacity as a staff attorney in the SEC Division of Enforcement. They do not necessarily reflect the views of the Commission, the commissioners, or its staff. Okay, on AI space, Margaret. AI space, artificial intelligence, machine learning, very important space for the SEC. It's not going to be surprising to anyone. It is transformational technology, promises to be transformational to the society in general, to the securities markets as well. And at the same time, it's highly complex. And it is truly emerging in the sense that things are changing, things are evolving frequently and fast. And it seems like it's going to continue doing so in the foreseeable future. So with those kind of a combination of those three things, the transformational nature of the technology, the high level of complexity, and the rapid pace of change, those three things, the combination of them, requires a particular type of approach from the SEC as a regulator, an approach that is well informed in the first place, that is also nimble at the same time. So we have to make sure to protect the investors in the space, but at the same time, we have to be conscious not to stymie the innovation that is occurring in this space. And why that's important, why that second part is important, is the innovation, particularly of this highly transformational nature, really ultimately redounds to the benefit of the U.S. securities markets, capital formation, and obviously the investors. So the first part I mentioned, and some of the commissioners have pointed out, recently is that we have to understand the technology, we have to understand its role in the securities markets, and some of that comes from engaging with the innovator community, as the Commission has done recently through roundtables, for example. Some of it also comes from learning by doing. Many components of the SEC are already using AI for a variety of tasks. This process of learning by using is going to accelerate under the current Commission, starting with the August 1st announcement of the creation of the SEC's AI task force. The task force will coordinate and accelerate the staff's use of AI to further our mission, and as the Chairman Atkins put it, ingraining innovation into our culture. So establishing AI familiarity within the Commission will have many benefits. For example, being able to separate fact-based reporting and allegations from sensationalism. It will also help us evaluate the different implications of different types of artificial intelligence out there, and critically will help us promote rather than stifle innovation, as Chairman Atkins put it recently.
That's helpful context, and obviously we're talking about the SEC as a whole just now. So let's talk about enforcement specifically and how it's viewing AI. But first, for the uninitiated, can you give a primer on the Enforcement Division's unit, the Cyber and Emerging Technologies unit, and its focus?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm a member of the Cyber and Emerging Technologies unit. It's a unit in the SEC's Division of Enforcement. It was announced on February 20 this year. And the announcement stated that the unit will focus on combating cyber-related misconduct and on protecting retail investors from bad actors in the emerging technologies space. The unit's staff over the years have accumulated substantial financial, fintech, and cyber expertise, and they will use this expertise to do primarily two things. They will help the SEC deploy its enforcement resources more judiciously, for example, by providing consultations across the division for matters that fall within the remit of the unit. And importantly, they will work to root out those seeking to misuse innovation to harm investors. Rooting out bad actors who misuse innovation obviously protects investors. That's our primary goal. But it also does something else a little more subtle. It has an important role to play in fostering innovation, actually, because misuse of innovative technologies diminishes the public's confidence in those technologies. So in other words, the bad actors are spoiling it for the rest of us. So that's another way that the unit will hopefully be helping the mission, the SEC's mission. The unit's expertise is currently being applied to investigate several types of misconduct. I'll just list a few things for you all. Fraud committed using emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning. Use of social media, dark web, false websites to perpetuate fraud. Hacking to obtain material non-public information. Takeovers of retail brokerage accounts. Fraud involving blockchain technology and crypto assets. Registered entities and firms' compliance with cybersecurity rules and regulations, and public issuers' fraudulent disclosure related to cybersecurity.
That's super interesting because you know, just thinking about AI and how enforcement is focused on it, you're using it as both a tool to help ferret out misconduct, correct, as well as it's obviously an enforcement priority in terms of what misconduct you're focused on. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's fair. On the first point, the SEC using AI as a tool, I'm not going to be able to talk very much about in a lot more detail of that, but I'll say that the public currently is able to view an inventory of the SEC's uses of AI. This is for 2024 on sec.gov/AI. And there we've disclosed some, not all, but some of the uses of the AI within the agency. So for example, enforcement disclosed use of AI for certain coding related tasks and extracting information from digital image files. Division of Examinations, another division within the SEC, disclosed the use of AI for identifying potentially manipulative trading and analyzing corpus of unstructured filings. There's quite a bit more there for folks who are interested in learning.
Great, super helpful, and I'm sure everybody's hanging on every word you are uttering. But let's turn it over to Shoba now. And can you talk a little bit about the cases we're seeing in the SEC space relating to AI that reflect what Arsen just said?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. I think one of the key things in thinking about AI, it's the new technology. First of all, not new, been around 20 years. We just think about it more dynamically now because of the generative AI products that are out there. And everybody, especially in the technology space and the startup space, wants to get in on it. And they want to say, we're using AI to make this product faster, better, lower cost, more efficient, less humans. Look at how awesome we are. And they, use the obviously really cool tech names to show that they're a new tech company. And so the first case I'm going to talk about had a really cool name. It was called Nate. Don't really know what you're selling if you're going to call yourselves Nate. But the point was that there was a shopping transaction efficiency generator. So if you are a small organization, a small coffee shop, if you want to be able to process transactions quicker, if you're selling clothing and you want all of that to happen in a more efficient manner for your customers, you could use this app. And one of the things that Nate was selling was that they were using AI. No humans needed, can process all this stuff using this really cool tech. So as lawyers, one of the first questions you should ask your client, hey, are you actually doing the thing that you claim you're doing? Because if you're not, that's probably going to be a problem. That's what happened here. A guy named Albert Saniger founded this company. He was the CEO of it. I don't know why I didn't call it Albert, but maybe Nate with his brother. And the problem was, despite claiming that he was using all this really cool AI tech for all this efficiency, there was a pile of humans in some room somewhere actually manually processing all the transactions. So it turns out when he said AI, he meant the other kind, the human kind. So that, as a result, the SEC and the DOJ charged him with fraud. Similarly, I think in the financial institution space, AI is really valuable. If you think about the sort of quant value of that, really processing significant amounts of transactions really, really efficiently, being able to manage large amounts of data, using data modeling, using these machine learning to be able to process data for purposes of investor value, hugely valuable, right? But again, maybe ask your clients, hey, are you actually doing the thing you claim you're doing? Because ultimately, if you're not, this is where you get into problems. And so last year, the SEC announced a settlement with Global Predictions and Delphia, both in the investment advisory space. And they both claim to be using AI and machine learning that incorporated their clients' data into its investment process, being able to help really increase returns using this really incredible technology that they actually weren't using. They claimed, for example, Delphia claimed it puts collective data to work to make our AI smarter. So the AI is getting smarter thanks to them. So it can predict which companies and trends are about to make it big and invest in them before everyone else does. Yeah, not so much. That was a lie. Didn't use any AI or machine learning. They didn't even use any, which I find pretty comical. At least do something. Global Predictions claimed to be the first regulated AI financial advisor, a platform that provided expert AI-driven forecasts, also a lie. So problematic for them and resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars in civil penalties. And then lastly, the larger scheme here, I think, in addition to recognizing and making sure your clients are actually doing the things that they say they do, which means nothing has changed in terms of an enforcement analysis, right? Like lies are a problem, and that's fraud, and that hasn't changed as a regulatory matter, as a criminal matter. But the other side of it is the compliance. One of the hardest things for compliance programs, as all of you know, is to keep up with evolving technology, both because you're going to have to supervise it, make sure your controls are in place to manage how that technology is impacting how the company is operating and how the company is being perceived publicly, but also using that technology in furtherance of your compliance program. So those are two different things that are really difficult and to manage, and the regulators are paying attention to that. They want to understand, and I think to Arsen's point, like understand what are you actually using, and are you using it in a way that you can have some comfort that your compliance program is actually doing the thing you think it's doing. And if it's not, if there's going to be faulty data being returned to you in your controls from your compliance program, that's going to create risk for you. And FINRA is engaged in a number of enforcement actions that have resulted in really significant problems because these compliance programs are failing because the reporting mechanisms are not giving them accurate information. So you actually need to know how your AI tools are being used. Dropping things into a public ChatGPT is obviously problematic. We've all seen how that's played out in the legal world. But it's actually even true if you buy an enterprise, or your client buys an enterprise AI product, you still need to understand how it works. You need to understand what data is being inputted, how the model is being trained, and what information you're using to implement your compliance program. So I think thinking about it both through the sort of traditional, maybe don't lie, and also recognizing the risks these new tools provide for your companies and for your own organizations.
Thanks, Shoba. And I mean, Arsen, anything else to add as the expert on our panel on SEC priorities, or you think Shoba's covered it pretty well?
Nothing to add.
Okay, so Luke, we're going to turn it over to you as our technical expert on the panel. Can you discuss a little bit about whether you're seeing a shift in the Commission's approach and view towards AI in the recent months under the new Commission?
Sure, thanks. Honestly, I'd make some comparisons to how we've seen other emerging tech issues handled in the past. This is sort of a layperson's take combined with helping firms respond to a variety of regulatory issues involving technology. Shoba covered it well in terms of the term that I would say similar to other issues past, think ESG, where there were sort of enforcement and or concerns around ESG washing. There's sort of an AI washing component that I think organizations should be thinking about sometimes in the case that was already mentioned in terms of intentionally trying to defraud investors, but then also just from being overly generous with some of those claims in certain top line or profitability considerations. I think in the future could be sort of a dynamic to think of. I'd also compare it a little bit to crypto. In the early stages of crypto, there was a mad rush to it. Some of the earlier issues that I even see some of my former colleagues in the room that helped me investigate some of these issues. But very early stage with crypto, it carried a same theme of defrauding investors and really kind of trying to maintain investor confidences, keep investors from being defrauded. So we're seeing some similarities there. But getting ahead of ourselves just a little bit, that I think we'll talk a little bit about a little bit further. There's similarities to even cloud technology. We don't really want cloud to go away. There's an obvious productivity benefit to it, but we saw that with that jumping in results potentially in pretty significant broad sweeping data security exposures. And so I think organizations, if you look at how cybersecurity has been treated over time, won't go into that too deeply, but organizations that jump too quickly into cloud, particularly say the middle to upper middle market that may not have the same maturity of governance or compliance capabilities, as they jump into these things, while they add a productivity benefit, there's still a pretty significant newer footprint with complexity and potential risk exposures. Some of those we're already seeing from just a pure data security standpoint, but then also, just the potential harm that those cause to the firm performing correctly with that AI, or harming things, harming people and their PII from an identity or other decisioning that's made in some sort of biased way, which is a totally separate topic. But ultimately, to cap it all up, I would say let's look to the past a little bit with other emerging technologies. Don't take all of them in one basket, but there are, I think, given the immaturity of the technology, organizations should be thinking about aspects of investor impact, the AI washing, and then other components of just good risk management to make sure there's certain human safety elements to it.
Thanks, great advice. I think we would be remiss if we don't acknowledge there's more than one regulator who's looking at AI. So, David, can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing with respect to FINRA and not only their public statements, but their enforcement actions in AI?
Sure. First, before I begin, it's probably just an old habit from my time at the commission, but I will kind of echo what Arsen said, which is, I'm happy to be here. What I'm saying today are my views. They don't reflect necessarily what other folks at AT&T think. So having said that, obviously FINRA has long been involved and concerned with the AI space going back, say 2015 when they started issuing notices. 2020, they did a big report on it, the report of AI in the securities industry, and they've been doing that ever since. I'll just talk briefly about the 25 regulatory oversight report to the extent it talked about AI. And for those who are not familiar with it, that it was very focused on AI in that report. And a couple of takeaways that I took from that was, first, like Shoba said before, a main takeaway is the rules that apply everywhere else apply equally in the Gen AI space. So just because it's a new technology doesn't mean that new rules apply. It's just a matter of making sure you adapt your practices and compliance with those rules to the practical realities of Gen AI. As part of that, FINRA focused on talking of making sure you have adequate supervision at both, and I thought this was interesting, both at the enterprise level and at the individual level. I suspect that some firms can err on one side or the other of that, but they made a point to focus on stressing compliance at both levels. Another takeaway from it was, obviously, the encouraging firms to identify and mitigate risk with AI, and they go through some of that. We've talked about some of those here. To me, that's just part and parcel of the first point, which is the rules that apply elsewhere apply there to make sure you're not making misrepresentations. For example, you don't want a chat bot that, people, obviously increases the efficiency of communication with your clients, but you want to be careful that your chat bot's not kind of delving into giving investment advice without having human review, for example. So things like that. And then the last thing that I took away from it, and it's interesting, it's a good segue for this panel as well. It focused on, AI brings increased cybersecurity risks. And so FINRA was encouraging firms to recognize that reality and take appropriate steps to make sure their cybersecurity policies take into account the risk that AI can use as a threat, in the form of threat actors. Like Arsen was saying, intrusion into accounts. FINRA was encouraging firms to make sure they are taking steps to protect against that. In terms of enforcement actions, I think we already kind of covered that a little bit, but my takeaway from it was there are a couple of enforcement actions in 2024 that, well, I don't think we need to go into the details. I think the big takeaway from it for me was the firms that are issued there, they were not small shop, they weren't unsophisticated firms without any compliance programs. These were fairly sophisticated shops with established compliance programs, and still they somehow fell short of making sure they were extending those compliance programs to their Gen AI work. And I just thought that stood out because I think it can be tempting to think that that's really a problem for kind of smaller places that haven't really built out their compliance program. But those cases really show that no, it can happen to anyone. And so it kind of reinforces the point before of just paying attention to that and making sure you're identifying and mitigating the risks.
Right. We don't want to ignore cybersecurity, though it's coming up a little bit, but it may be helpful for the audience to hear a little bit about the client servers, what you're telling your clients in terms of the challenges and opportunities that AI presents. And I would just open it up given our limited time. So Shoba, David, Luke, anything you want to say on that regard?
Happy to start. I think I was talking a little bit about compliance programs earlier, and I think to David's point, even mature compliance programs can really suffer. Like everything else, this technology is evolving fast, and the compliance programs need to evolve with it. And I'll give you a sort of a simple example that's come up in the last few years with the advent of a lot of the AI tools in our everyday virtual meeting life, all the transcribed meetings. If those are automatically turned on without any participants consenting, your team might be running afoul of the two-party consent requirements of most states in the United States, and those are sometimes criminally enforced. So those are anti-eavesdropping laws. Illinois is one of them. Those of us who work federally know that we only have one-party consent. We love those for confidential sources, but that is not a thing at the state level. And the problem is, it's if you have multiple people in those states and they are not consenting, you're running into this large-scale problem where somebody is going to figure this out and create risk for you. And also, don't you want people to consent to them being recorded? For an AI transcriber to work, it actually is recording, and then it's just working at a really fast pace to then be able to produce that transcription. So just that's a really simple, somewhat ridiculous thing that people were crashing into regularly, because a lot of these tools were automatically, Zoom, Copilot, and Teams, et cetera, were just automatically turning them on. And so recognizing from an enterprise standpoint, these are things that the lawyers need to be looking at, the privacy lawyers or cyber lawyers, to be ensuring that you're thinking through your consent, opt-in, opt-out requirements. That is a simple example of the simplest little foot fault that you could run into. That is way more complicated the more complicated your tools become. And so as you're thinking about your compliance programs, recognize you've got to be thinking about it across the spectrum from all the way to a user experience to the processing of the data that's being input and what kind of data is being input. This concept of your data is your data, don't worry, you're signing up for an enterprise tool, it's going to be fine. Well, what does that cloud really look like? What are the roadblocks in the cloud? How is it being trained? If it really is your data, is only being trained on your data, that's going to actually limit the value of the model. On the other hand, it's going to protect your data. So there's a cyber risk to everything involving AI as well. So it's really recognizing where the guardrails are from a compliance program standpoint.
I would just generally say from an AI rollout standpoint, it's clear to us that some of it is moving more rapidly than many other aspects of the firm can kind of keep up with from either control, protections, or risk management standpoint. Just because there's so many accountants in the room, I would say, I try to tell people to think about it from an income statement approach almost, that sort of the things kind of adding to the top line and the contribution margin dynamic in terms of, if you're in the software business or if you're in the data management business, huge areas of risk. And if sort of legal teams or compliance teams don't have a handle on the sort of the front end piece of the revenue cycle and how that might be being used or adopted by different business units, that just bears a lot more risk to some of the other areas. But then you go to the bottom half of the income statement when you think about some of the, I'll just say more SG&A concerns or back office integrations that Shoba mentioned, Copilot, fill in the blank, that we're probably all using. And then I would say that just sort of the inherent nature of the human or insider threat to kind of use AI generatively on both sides or both the top and the bottom of the income statement, that kind of bears its own set of risks also. But I think practically speaking, it starts with firms creating and establishing good policy. There are newer guides out there to do that, NIST and others. And then I think you integrate this into the pretty typical risk assessment process, not typical in terms of the newer emergent tech piece, but that it's at least a slice of the overall yearly or whatever hygiene of risk assessment process is. I think firms will want to be able to show that hygiene when they're doing that.
I think all I would add on that from kind of the in-house perspective is, companies, I can just speak for our company, and I'm sure it's true for others, are very keen to take advantage of the efficiencies that AI brings, but obviously are obviously constrained by resource allocation issues and how to prioritize. We'll talk about it later. You have your cybersecurity, that requires a lot of resources. You want to use AI in that capacity, but you also want to use AI to facilitate your communications with your customers, to make your customer experience seamless and painless from their point of view. But at the same time, does that create, you have to keep in mind, does that create risks to their data? Obviously in our space, we're very concerned about protecting the data of our customers. So we want to make sure that we're, giving them the benefit of the AI, which is, a primary, goal of ours, with also making sure they're protected. And so I think that just kind of goes all the way through the enterprise of wanting to balance the tremendous advantages that can come from AI while also mitigating the risk that it can bring with it.
Okay, and of course we want to talk about cybersecurity too, but like everything, there's going to be an AI context to it. And I'd ask Luke if he can just give a brief overview about how we're seeing the two linked, both cybersecurity and how AI is now, being part of that topic.
It's the good and the bad in that sense. We know that the adversaries are taking advantage of different AI advancements in certain ways, and then we see the enterprise taking advantage of some of that in the security stack, as we would call it as well. On the threat side, people like to talk about that. There's probably, pretty much everyone in here has probably experienced already the use of AI themselves in terms of whether it's targeting and spam messages to their phones, or some of the social engineering. Most of us here work in fairly high-profile firms, and we know threat actors are targeting those firms and leveraging aspects of automations that many might consider AI. We're seeing it in terms of their increased scale to conduct these operations, and increased efficiency to do some of that. It's much easier, as an example, now to even create what we would call some of my national security intelligence friends in the room would say, to create a target package. We can do that in a much smaller fraction of time than we used to be able to, from say a penetration testing standpoint. The threat actors are doing the same thing to identify their targets much more quickly, and so forth. They're using it for software development purposes. If you and I can stage a website or some other software capability by vibe coding, as we would say, the threat actors are doing that too with malware. The good news is, though, we're still, just from, say, a ransomware trend standpoint, there's 2 or 3 variants that have been out for 2 or 3 years, which is sort of good news in the sense that some of the commonality, what has worked for years is still good for the threat actors, and that's good for us for detection. And so just transitioning a little bit, I think in organizations, how they want to be using AI for these purposes to counter the threat is enhanced AI for, say, call screening, or enhanced call filtering capabilities with automated answering and filtering to make it to the true person. I think on the defense side, huge opportunity to create greater detection using advanced analytics and automations to kind of automatically defend, kind of think firewalls. So your oven will automatically shut down if it gets too hot. Same principles will more inherently apply and are applying to a cyber threat. If you even look back at some of the recent, to bring it back to the SEC enforcement dynamic, firms that showed poor hygiene and were called on that for things like detection misses, or more vulnerabilities than the enterprise can keep up with. Those are perfect situations for AI to bring scale to organizations that couldn't necessarily defend themselves. Kind of look at Microsoft. Their footprint has been very large, even for them to protect or name the big enterprise. And so huge opportunity for AI to bring more scale and priority and risk management.
I just wanted to add,
Go ahead.
I was just going to add one thought on that. And I see similarities back, whenever it was, decades ago, when people, easily fell for the phone scams. People still fall for it, but there was a time, I'm old enough to remember, when it was not, it was very common. People, even, sophisticated folks who knew it was a risk would fall for it. I feel like that's a similar dynamic at play right now with the ability of AI to come into the cyber world and, create emails, for example, that look and sound exactly like the type of email that you would get from a colleague. And you see it. It has the right email domain. It has the right email address from it. It sounds like something that person might be saying. And the only warning sign for you might be, well, that's interesting. I don't usually get emails from Sheila. Why am I getting this? But otherwise, there's nothing out of the ordinary about it. And so I think a challenge for everybody, but for people from the client point of view, is how do you train your people to be that front line of defense on the cybersecurity? And I know that I know companies do. I know our company spends a lot of time and resources trying to do that. But I think that's going to be an increasing challenge as the ability of the threat actors to use AI to try to penetrate the cyber defenses.
Okay, and these perspectives are great, but I don't want to ignore that we've got the regulator on the panel, the regulator. I'm sure you don't want me to call you that. But anyways, obviously, we want to hear from you, Arsen, about, if you can just talk a little bit about the SEC cybersecurity regime and whether it's being impacted right now by, the prominence of AI as of late.
Yeah. Actually, the regulator is what all my good friends call me. All right,
Capital T, capital R.
Yes, I'm happy to talk about the cybersecurity regulatory regime at the SEC. I like to think about it and break it out into three categories, three buckets based on the type of an entity that is being regulated. Because the different entities present different cybersecurity concerns for investors, our primary protected population, right? So the three buckets are publicly traded companies that investors invest in, registered firms, broker-dealers, investment advisors that hold investor information and investor accounts, and then there's a very small number of firms that constitute the sort of infrastructure of the securities markets. We call them SCI firms. And so the different entities are regulated in different ways because what I said, they present different risks to the investors. So for publicly traded companies, the regulatory focus is to ensure that the investing public is appropriately informed about cybersecurity incidents and cybersecurity risks that are material to the company. So here, the relevant provisions are the 2023 Cybersecurity Disclosure Rule, obviously the anti-fraud provisions of the 33 and 34 Act, the false filing provisions of the 34 Act, and Rule 13A15, which is the Disclosure Controls and Procedures Rule. For firms, registered firms or broker-dealers and investment advisors that hold a lot of investors' PII, private financial information, and also, in many cases, keys to the accounts that hold the investors' assets and funds. For those firms, the regulatory regime, the focus is a little bit different, is on protecting that information that they're holding and protecting those accounts. So here the relevant regulations are, the key regulations are Regulation SP and SID, and the two of them essentially require firms to have reasonable policies and procedures in place to protect customer information, customer accounts, and to respond to, identify and respond to identity theft red flags. And then the smallest bucket is those 50 sort of market structure entities that about 50 depending on the day that I mentioned. Those are national exchanges, certain alternative trading systems, some clearing agents. Those entities really form the sort of the underhood inner workings of the market. So the unsurprising regulatory focus there is on resiliency, making sure that the technology that supports important market functions continues working. And so the relevant provisions there is regulation SCI, which requires that firms within that space regularly review, maintain, and where appropriate, fix systems that are supporting important market functions. And also notify the SEC of cybersecurity events that impact those systems. I don't have a lot to add to what Luke said on AI and how it is overlapping with cybersecurity. Obviously, bad actors are using AI in cybersecurity space to compromise companies and entities, and the defenders are using AI to try to protect. I think the commission is going to be taking a technology-neutral approach to enforcement of federal securities laws in this space.
Can you just describe for us what you mean by technology neutral? I think that would be helpful to the extent you can.
Yeah. So very simple. Just because some technology is being used doesn't make it more or less likely that there is a violation. So because it's AI doesn't mean it's going to be we're going to be more likely to find a violation of federal securities laws, or less likely to find a violation of federal securities laws. We're going to step away and see if step away from the technology after we understand the technology, obviously, but we're going to try to answer the question: are the regulatory provisions that I mentioned, the federal securities laws, are they being violated, regardless of what kind of technology is being used to make to support the violation?
That's very helpful. And we've got just under 3 minutes, so I'd like to do something similar we did on the AI side and talk a little bit about how our client servers and in-house counsel are advising their clients, given the SEC's focus on cybersecurity with the AI overlay. So Shoba, do you want to kick things off?
Sure. I mean, one of the key things, I think, cyber, just like with AI, any technology, any emerging technology, to Arsen's point, technology neutral, the whole point of that is lies are still a lie. We already talked about that earlier. Fraud is still a fraud. It doesn't matter what the tool was. Just be conscientious of what your clients are saying publicly and what they're actually doing. The other piece of that from a technology standpoint that I want to stress, particularly with the new AI products, a lot of these products are going to market really fast, putting aside whether or not they're lying about their capabilities. One of the things that the engineers are being pushed to get these technology out fast, they're not always building in security as part of the protocols. And one of the missing aspects that I've consistently seen is lack of audit tools and logging tools, which from an investigator standpoint is really, really challenging. So make sure when your companies your clients are companies pushing out products, and when your clients are buying products, that they're thinking about it through a security lens in addition to the efficiencies that the tool is going to be providing. Because when you're brought in to investigate, if Luke's coming in and needs to investigate a cybersecurity attack that might have an AI component, he needs the logs. He needs to actually be able to audit what happened. And if there's no capability to be able to retain that kinds of information, you will be out of luck as to having any sort of backstory of what happened. So that's a really key part of this larger story, in my opinion.
Just to build on that briefly, the challenge with the industry is we don't know what seatbelts to put on in many cases, and just given the massive data load, a lot of the artifacts, while some are there, the caution I would give is collecting everything will be a challenge, and there is an ephemeral nature to just the use of AI that is going to continue and probably will always be a concern. But bringing it back just to the SEC and cyber enforcement for a moment, in general, like some of the new rules, I guess some rule proposals have been pulled back recently, so that's an item of note. But in terms of some of the cybersecurity rules that were in effect just recently, I guess have generally been effective to protect investors. But the trend so far is that if organizations are notifying in good faith pursuant to the cybersecurity rules that generally, firms are able to kind of move forward and sort of be in compliance with the regs.
Okay, David, you got 17 seconds to put a bow on this.
All right, I'll talk fast. I said 2 points. One, to follow up on what Luke just said, and kind of back to the resource issue, and to what Shoba said, keeping like log records back in time, that takes up a tremendous amount of resource space in terms of the enterprise's ability to do that. You obviously want to have the ability for your own internal cyber intrusion teams to be able to recreate, and not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because you want to prevent it from happening again, and that's how you learn. But then you're balancing that. There's a balance there. And then one last thing, just on the enforcement angle, speaking of other enforcers, one thing to always keep in mind in the cyber world is it's not just the SEC. There are a lot of other enforcers out there, state AG groups, FTC if you're in that industry, FCC if you're in that industry, whatever regulator regulates your space. If you're a company, they will have an interest in your cyber practices as well.
And don't forget the states either, right? So it's a complex world out there. But thank you, panel, for all your insights. Much appreciated, and thanks for having us. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.